a little bit behind. So what I'm going to talk is following on this theme of an integrated approach to addressing issues related to air pollution, climate change, and, as was discussed this morning, the short-lived climate pollutants. So, do I use that?
Should I be up and down?
Right. So, first of all, it doesn't make an awful lot of sense to deal with air quality issues and climate change, the greenhouse gases, as separate issues. They are so intertwined that it makes an awful lot of sense to try and develop planning to address both issues at the same time. And so one of the reasons, as was said this morning, is that the same sources give rise to both CO2, but also a suite of other pollutants. Now, there are the greenhouse gases. The most important ones are carbon dioxide and methane, but methane also falls into this category of short-lived climate pollutants. Now, why are they important? Partly they're important in terms of our fight against climate change, in that the short-lived climate pollutants, as is in their name, they only exist in the atmosphere, methane about 12 years, ozone a few weeks, black carbon a couple of days. So if you actually reduce the emissions, you get a fairly rapid response in the atmospheric concentration and therefore in the warming. So if we want to reduce the rate of warming in the near term, the only way to really do it is to address these short-lived species. At the same time, we have to keep going down on CO2. They're not alternatives. They are two strategies to try and get us on the 1.5 degree C path. But if we want to sort of stop the world warming rapidly, very rapidly, we can slow it down a little bit. It's still going to increase, but slow it down a bit by addressing these species. Now, these short-lived climate pollutants, they're also, at least with methane and black carbon, they're also part of the air quality issue, because methane is a very important precursor of tropospheric ozone formation, which, as we know, affects vegetation, crop and forest yields, as well as human health impacts. Black carbon from incomplete combustion is part of PM2.5, but those same sources of incomplete combustion give rise to nitrogen oxides, organic carbon, carbon monoxide, etc., which both contribute to ozone formation, PM2.5, which affects health. So they're very, very related issues. Now I'm trying to find the arrow. What if I try?
Left, right, also.
I'm trying the left, right. I didn't seem to do that. What's going on here? Yeah. Any advice?
No,
by magic. No, not on there.
No,
online.
That's on the online one. The problem is you've moved on to Zoom. There you go. So now.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Great.
You were in Zoom.
So
not the presentation.
just to emphasise how closely linked these issues are, this is some work done by the Joint Research Centre of the EU. So these are the old NDCs, so the 2015. If all of those NDCs were achieved, then there would be a benefit for air quality to the tune of about 500,000 avoided premature deaths. If we actually hit 2 degrees C, I know we're aiming for 1.5, but this is looking at achieving 2 degrees C, we're talking about over 1 million premature deaths avoided. So again, emphasizing that, you know, the fight against climate and air quality are incredibly intertwined. And over the past couple of weeks, we had a COP. Now, a lot of people, so as was said, I'm on the scientific advisory panel of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, which from the name obviously tries to put these things together. You know, it's quite interesting. There was a health pavilion. This is the health pavilion, which WHO put up. And talking to somebody from WHO, they said previously we were chasing people to put health arguments to climate, now they're chasing us. So there is an increased realization, although there's an awful lot of people who still think in silos and don't address these issues as a combined problem. But what we've been doing, some colleagues of mine looked through all of the NDCs and picked out those highlighting the benefits for air quality of climate mitigation. So in 2015, there were a number of countries that already then highlighted the health benefits of climate action. It's doubled now. So it's still not every country, by no means, but it's increased. So it's increasing, but there's a lot of room for improvement. And another way of looking at this is that it's not only a question of whether they say we care about air quality, but also in terms of looking at specific measures which the NDCs highlight that the countries will undertake. Now, they may be for CO2 reasons, but they will have an impact on air pollutants as well. So municipal solid waste open burning, the number of countries who've included that in their NDC has increased. It's still only these columns here show the total proportion of the estimated emission from that sector that would be covered by that measure. So in every case, the residential, this is a massive killer from indoor exposure. The number of countries has gone up to 30 countries who put this forward. But it's still only less than half of the total emission or the total emission of black carbon. So there's still a lot of countries who are suffering from that indoor air pollution from cooking with biomass who don't include it as a measure in their NDC. So there is room for improvement, but there is definitely an increase. And obviously electromobility, which will reduce black carbon, a lot of countries are putting it in their NDCs, and it will have an impact both on CO2 if they have zero carbon electricity and air quality. So now I want to maybe go into another aspect related to putting these things together. So a number of countries are, waking up to the fact that these are intertwined issues and they want to deal with them together. And recognize somebody from the audience there. These are the countries who are involved in that effort with the Climate Clean Air Coalition. Now, the UK is part of the Climate Clean Air Coalition, not as active as I'd like to see, but they're a member, as are over 70 other countries and lots of other organizations. But if we look at the UK NDC, this explicit link between air quality and climate change is recognized in the NDC. But the point is that there are many other countries in the world who don't have the same capacity as the UK to really understand what those linkages are. So therefore, within an initiative of the Climate Clean Air Coalition called Supporting National Action and Planning, we've been helping a number of countries develop their plans to integrate air pollution, climate change, and to focus on integrating these short-lived climate pollutant strategies within various sectoral and other strategies. And these are the countries that we've been working with in Africa, Asia, Latin America. And some of these, this support has led to a number of national plans in Colombia, in Bangladesh, Mexico, and the Maldives even. So, and in order to support the development of these national plans, one of the things, there's a lot of capacity missing in these countries to really understand what the linkages are. And so one of the things we've been doing is to sort of enable countries to develop comprehensive emission inventories and projections of the greenhouse gases and air pollutants within the same system. And this is an example of, this is from the NDC for Nigeria. So this is the information which has gone into supporting their NDC. And there are different scenarios. So this is using an SEI tool called LEAP, or low emissions analysis planning. And there are different scenarios. We have a baseline, we have the INDC, the old one, enhanced ambition and maximum ambition. So these were scenarios that supported the choices that Nigeria made. In terms of, these are in CO2 equivalents, the greenhouse gas mitigation. But in addition, we're able to look at the emissions of all of the air pollutants. So the organic carbon, black carbon, direct PM2, primary 2.5, PM2.5 emissions, NOx, NVOCs, methane, as well as the CO2 and the HFCs as well. So with this information, we're able to sort of outline what the reductions are for all these different pollutants and imply what we can do in terms of an improvement in human health. And in 2019, the estimates are that about 200,000 premature deaths occur in Nigeria every year due to ambient outdoor air pollution. So these reductions of 50–60% will have a significant impact. And if we look at, the scenarios are based on very specific actions in all the different sectors. And if we look at this one in the residential sector, the plan for the most ambitious scenario is that half of the population are using LPG and 13% using improved cook stoves. This would be a massive transition for Nigeria, who mainly use biomass for cooking. And there would be a massive improvement in human health. In the maximum abatement scenario, it would be 30,000 avoided premature deaths from indoor exposure to air pollution alone, from our calculations, from this one measure of addressing cooking. So this is the sort of analysis which is very useful. And if we look at various different countries, so here's if we look at the NDCs, some of them are actually putting these quantifications. This 30,000 number is in the Nigeria's NDC. About 3,000 from ambient is in Ghana's NDC. Togo even has, we work with, they have 1,000 reduced premature deaths. And so they're actually putting this data in the NDC to emphasize the linkages. But many countries simply employ consultants to develop these NDCs and all the analysis behind them. It's really not good enough, especially if we're going to move to annual updates. We really need to institutionalize the capacity to do these sorts of analysis in the countries themselves, where it will have a much greater impact on their decision making than if people are flying in from outside with glossy reports. Right, so that's work with countries. And then I'd just like to change tack a bit, because one of the interesting things I found in COP was a lot of people talking about the potential of the private sector to sort of partially get us out of this hole in terms of climate change, but also air pollution. And we heard from our colleagues in Bosch that they've got greenhouse gas accounting throughout their supply chain. A lot of companies have this, but what they don't have is air pollutants down their value chain. So in the private sector, a lot of the emissions of different air pollutants are related to private sector activities around the world. Now, in COP in Madrid, IKEA came up to somebody from the Climate and Clean Air Coalition and asked whether it was possible to help them quantify their air pollutant emissions to add to their CO2 quantification down their value chain. So we've been working with IKEA and the CCAC to develop a guide on how you would practically add the air pollutant emission quantification to the value chain. So here we've got the value chain all the way from raw material extraction, manufacturing, distribution, retail, in-use and end of life. And then in each of those, we have different sources of pollution, and there's going to be a guide with emission factors and methodologies for quantifying that. We're at the point of just about having the first version of the guide. We're then going to trial it with a number of large companies to make sure it works. And then by mid next year, it'll be available for any company to use. So it'll be very interesting to know how much this can change the emissions in different countries. Just changing tack again, if I've got time, is to talk about methane. And methane, we undertook within the CCAC a global methane assessment. And I think that this has sort of set a lot of hairs running, which you may have heard about from progress in COP. But this assessment, which was chaired by Drew Shindell, and it involved a number of different authors and also looked at 5 different GCMs quantifying the climate and air quality impacts, including the Hadley model, GISS model, and various other models from Japan and US. And there is a nice decision support tool which you can look at there. Now, why are we particularly worried about methane? Well, all the reasons as it's related to ozone and climate change, but also it's increasing more rapidly than ever. Certainly not going down. But this is the concentration from pre-industrial times. And this is the line we need to go for 1.5 consistent mitigation. The IPCC report said we have to reduce methane as well as CO2, and that's the line we need to take. So from 2020, we need to sort of turn a corner very rapidly. And what the assessment did was look at ways that could be done. And essentially, so 60% reduction in methane from fossil fuels, about 1/3 of the methane emission from waste globally, and about 20% from agriculture, because that was considered a more intractable sector. This is by 2030. Now, if we did that by 2030, you would avoid warming of about 0.3 degrees C by the 2040s. But also, you'd avoid deaths, over 250,000 deaths from tropospheric ozone, over 750,000 visits to hospital because of acute asthma attacks, avoided 26 million tons of only 4 staple crops, and then with the reduction in warming, 73 billion lost work hours avoided for those people who have to work outside and get heat stress. And not only, what's going on? Well, I have another slide, but it was no. Not only do you get all those benefits, but it's relatively cheap as well, either negative cost or low cost. So, what happened last couple of weeks? We had the global methane pledge. So the US and the EU have taken bull by the horns and persuaded 107 countries to join this pledge, which says it's going to reduce methane by 30% by 2030. That is an increase in ambition on the NDC, I'm certain. And so philanthropies have put up $300 million to support that process over the next 3 years. It's all very new. We don't know how it's going to work, but it is a global response to this issue. But it mustn't detract from the reduction in CO2, which we also need at the same time. So concluding, there is some progress on integrating air pollution and climate change and including the short-lived climate pollutants in strategies. A number of countries have black carbon targets in their NDCs, for example. So the pennies drop that we have to consider the mitigation of these together. Planning needs to be institutionalized and made easy to update, and it needs to have capacity in the countries to be able to do that. The health benefits of action are now increasingly part of the climate discourse, and it is the most important thing for many of the countries, much more important than their reduction of CO2. They want to solve their air pollution problems. It's a way of getting them to also do their bit in terms of CO2. They're not particularly interested in CO2 emission reductions because they're so small and often inconsequential in terms of the total CO2 emission. With black carbon mitigation, the countries are really interested due to these local benefits. They need support, but it can really increase climate ambition. And the emission is decreasing in many places, but other places it's going up, but we need more focus on this. HFCs are another short-lived climate pollutant. The Kigali Amendment is another positive move to try and prevent massive emissions of those. And with methane, huge opportunities. And now the global community has made a pledge. We need to make sure that gets implemented, but it is a positive step at least. So thank you.